The radiator in the boys' dormitory hissed and died, leaving the room freezing. I was Ben, the new mute janitor, kneeling in the corner pretending to fix a valve. My knees ached, but my heart ached more. I had sent this orphanage $5 million last year for a new heating system. Where did the money go? I looked around at the thin blankets and the shivering children huddled together for warmth. Then, I heard a scuffle. A large bully pushed a small, skinny boy onto the cold floor. "Give it up, Leo," the bully sneered. "Nobody is coming for you. You're trash." The little boy, clutching a tattered magazine clipping to his chest, stood up with tears streaming down his face. "You're wrong," he shouted, his voice trembling but defiant. "My dad is coming. Look, this is him. His name is Julian Thorne. He owns the world, and he's going to save me." I stopped cold. The wrench slipped from my hand and clattered against the floor. I had never seen this child before in my life, yet he was holding my picture like it was a holy relic. And in that moment, as I watched him defend a phantom father who didn't know he existed, I knew I would burn this place to the ground to save him. The champagne was vintage, the caviar was imported, and every smile in the room was fake. I stood in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel, a crystal glass in my hand that I hadn't touched, watching 300 of the city's wealthiest citizens congratulate themselves on their generosity. The annual Hearts for Hope charity gala. My charity gala, technically, though I'd long ago stopped feeling any connection to these events. "Mr. Thorne." A woman in a dress that cost more than most people's cars approached me, her hand extended. "Your foundation is simply marvelous. The work you do for those poor children, it's inspiring." I shook her hand with practiced ease. "Thank you, Mrs. Vanderbilt. Every child deserves a chance." The words came automatically now. I'd said them so many times they'd lost all meaning. She nodded enthusiastically, already scanning the room for her next conversation, her next opportunity to be seen doing good. That's what these events were really about. Being seen. The actual children we were supposedly helping? They were abstractions. Numbers on a spreadsheet. Tax deductions. Feel-good stories to share at cocktail parties. I hated it. I hated all of it. But most of all, I hated myself for participating in the charade. Julian, my assistant, Marcus, appeared at my elbow. "The mayor wants a photo." "Of course he does," I muttered, but I followed Marcus across the ballroom, my face automatically arranging itself into the appropriate expression of benevolent philanthropy. The mayor pumped my hand enthusiastically for the cameras. "Julian Thorne, the man who put the heart in capitalism. Tell me, how does it feel to have saved so many young lives?" I wanted to tell him I hadn't saved anyone. I wanted to tell him that writing checks from an ivory tower wasn't the same as actually helping. I wanted to tell him that I was a 50-year-old man who'd built an empire but couldn't build a single genuine human connection. Instead, I smiled and said, "Every child deserves a champion, Mr. Mayor." The cameras flashed. The crowd applauded. And I felt absolutely nothing. Later that night, I sat alone in my penthouse apartment, 30 floors above the city, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't. The walls were decorated with awards and commendations. Philanthropist of the Year, Champion of Children's Rights, Humanitarian Excellence. They were all lies. I poured myself a scotch and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below me, a galaxy of lights. Somewhere down there were the 7 orphanages and children's homes I funded. Thorne Haven, Thorne House, Thorne Academy. I'd named them all after myself, like some kind of medieval lord claiming territory. But I'd never actually visited any of them. Not once. I'd grown up in the foster system myself. 17 different homes before I aged out at 18. Some were okay. Most were nightmares. I'd sworn that when I made my fortune, I'd do better. I'd save kids like me from the hell I'd endured. But somewhere along the way, the mission had become a brand. The passion had become a performance. And the children had become invisible. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Great event tonight. Raised $3.2 million. You're trending on social media." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a single photograph, creased and faded. Me at age 10, standing in front of my 4th foster home. I was skinny, suspicious, already learning that adults couldn't be trusted. That boy had promised himself he'd be different. He'd be the adult who showed up, who cared, who saved the kids who needed saving. What had I become instead? I was about to pour another scotch when I noticed a letter on my desk that I'd somehow missed earlier. Hand-delivered, according to the note from my doorman. The envelope was cheap, the handwriting shaky. I opened it. Dear Mr. Thorne, I hope this letter finds you well. I am Sister Clara, one of the staff at Thornhaven for Boys. I have worked here for 43 years, and I have never written to a benefactor before, but I am writing to you now because I am afraid. The children are cold, Mr. Thorne. The heating system you so generously funded last year, we have never seen it. The new gymnasium, it was never built. The educational programs, they do not exist. I do not know where the money goes. I only know that the children suffer. They are hungry, they are cold, and they are losing hope. I am an old woman, and I do not have the power to change things. But you do. Please, Mr. Thorne, please help us. The children speak of you like you are a hero. Please do not let them down. In faith and desperation. Sister Clara Murphy. I read the letter 3 times. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the financial reports for Thornhaven. Everything looked perfect. State-of-the-art heating system, installed. New gymnasium, completed. Educational programs, fully operational. Every penny accounted for, every expense justified. But Sister Clara's letter told a different story. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. Julian? It's 1 in the morning. I need you to arrange something, I said. And I need you to keep it absolutely confidential. 3 days later, I stood in front of a bathroom mirror I didn't recognize, looking at a man I didn't know. Gone was the tailored suit and the designer watch. Gone was the carefully maintained appearance of success. In their place was Ben, a broken-down handyman in dirty gray overalls, with a beanie pulled low over graying hair that I deliberately left unwashed. I'd added some fake scars to my cheek, used makeup to create dark circles under my eyes, and put dirt under my fingernails. I looked 20 years older than I was. I looked beaten down by life. I looked invisible. Perfect. Marcus had arranged everything with his usual efficiency. He'd created a complete background for Ben Morrison, a drifter with sporadic work history, no fixed address, and a reputation for being quiet and hardworking. The kind of person no one would look at twice. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked, watching me with concern. If anyone finds out the CEO of Thorne Foundations is working undercover at his own orphanage, no one will find out, I said, practicing a limp. I'd strapped a brace around my knee under the overalls to remind me to favor my left leg. I'll be invisible. That's the point. And what exactly are you looking for? I thought about Sister Clara's letter. The cold children. The missing millions. The suffering. The truth, I said. Thornhaven for Boys sat on a hill overlooking the city, a Gothic revival building that had once been a wealthy merchant's mansion. In the photographs on our website, it looked imposing and dignified. In person, on a gray November morning, it looked like something out of a horror movie. The iron gates were rusted. The driveway was cracked and overgrown with weeds. Several windows on the upper floors were broken and covered with cardboard. The whole place had an air of decay that made my stomach turn. This was what $5 million a year bought. I hefted my toolbox and limped up to the main entrance. The door was heavy oak, probably original to the building, and it stuck in the frame. I had to shoulder it hard to get it open. The entrance hall was freezing. My breath came out in clouds. The chandelier overhead was missing half its crystals, and the grand staircase had several broken spindles. The marble floor was cracked and dirty. Can I help you? A sharp voice echoed through the hall. I turned to see a woman descending the staircase. She was in her mid-40s, dressed in expensive designer clothes that seemed wildly out of place in the dilapidated surroundings. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her jewelry extensive. This had to be Beatrice Crypt, the director. I pulled off my beanie respectfully and ducked my head, playing the role of the humble worker. I pulled out a piece of paper, the work order Marcus had created, and handed it to her without speaking. She barely glanced at it. Oh, the new handyman. You're late. I pointed to my throat and shook my head, maintaining my cover as someone who was mute or at least had severe difficulty speaking. Oh, wonderful, she said with heavy sarcasm. A mute janitor. Well, at least you won't gossip. And you look cheap enough. She looked me up and down with obvious distaste. $30 a day, cash, no benefits. You'll fix whatever breaks, clean whatever I tell you to clean, and stay out of sight when we have visitors. Are we clear? I nodded. The children are in lessons until 3. You'll eat with the staff in the basement kitchen. Don't even think about touching the food in the main kitchen. That's for guests and donors. She turned to walk away, then paused. Oh, and Ben, don't look the donors in the eye if we have visitors. You're ugly enough to scare the wallets away. She laughed at her own joke and clicked away on her expensive heels, leaving me standing in the freezing entrance hall. I waited until she was gone, then pulled out the small camera Marcus had given me. It was disguised as a button on my overalls. I pressed it once to start recording. Time to see what $5 million really bought. The basement was worse than the entrance hall. I made my way down the narrow servant stairs, my toolbox banging against my leg. The walls were water-stained and covered in mold. The air smelled like mildew and desperation. The staff kitchen was a grim little room with a card table, 2 folding chairs, and a mini-fridge that hummed ominously. A woman in a nun's habit was making tea on a hot plate. She looked up when I entered, and her face broke into a warm smile despite the weariness in her eyes. "You must be Ben," she said in a soft Irish accent. "I'm Sister Clara. Welcome to Thornhaven." Sister Clara, the woman who'd written the letter. She looked to be in her mid-60s, with kind eyes and hands worn from decades of hard work. I wanted to tell her who I really was, that I'd come because of her letter, that help was here. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to see everything first. I nodded and smiled, maintaining my cover. "You don't speak much, do you?" she said gently. "That's all right, dear. Sometimes silence is a blessing in a place like this." She poured me a cup of tea. "Miss Crypt probably told you to eat down here. What she didn't tell you is that there's no food budget for staff. We eat what's left over from the children's meals." She gestured to a pot on the hot plate. I looked inside and saw a watery gray substance that might have been oatmeal once. "It's not much," Sister Clara said apologetically, "but it's better than nothing." I thought about the catered lunch I'd had before coming here. Organic salad, grilled salmon, artisanal bread. The lunch had cost more than this woman probably earned in a week. I shook my head and gestured that I wasn't hungry, though my stomach was turning for different reasons. "Suit yourself, dear," Sister Clara said. "If you need anything, I'm usually in the chapel or the dormitories. The children like to talk to me." Her face clouded. "At least, they used to. They're so quiet now. So broken." She looked at me with sudden intensity. "You seem like a kind man, Ben. Please, while you're here, be gentle with them. They've had so little gentleness in their lives." I nodded, not trusting myself to maintain my cover if I tried to communicate more. After lunch, I began my inspection of the building. Ms. Crypt had given me a list of repairs: fixed the radiator in the boys' dormitory, unclogged the toilet in the second-floor bathroom, patched the leak in the roof above the dining hall. I started with the dormitory. The boys' dormitory was a long, narrow room on the 3rd floor that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. There were 20 metal frame beds lined up in 2 rows, each with a thin mattress and a threadbare blanket. No pillows, no personal decorations, nothing that suggested children lived here instead of prisoners. The radiator was indeed broken, but as I knelt to examine it, I realized it hadn't just broken, it had never been installed properly in the first place. This wasn't the new, state-of-the-art heating system I'd paid for. This was the original radiator from probably 100 years ago, barely functional and now completely dead. I pulled out my camera and documented everything. The broken radiator, the frost on the inside of the windows, the thin blankets, the water stains on the ceiling that indicated the roof had been leaking for months, maybe years. Where was the new heating system? Where were the new roof repairs? Where was any of the infrastructure I'd funded? I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly pocketed the camera. A moment later, a boy appeared in the doorway. He was maybe 12 or 13, large for his age, with the kind of hard eyes that came from growing up too fast. "Who are you?" he demanded. I pointed to the radiator and my toolbox, indicating I was there to fix it. "Good luck with that," the boy sneered. "It's been broken for 2 years. Miss Crypt don't fix nothing unless the inspectors are coming." He walked to his bed, the one in the corner. I noticed the position of someone who'd claimed territory, and pulled out a magazine from under his mattress. I went back to examining the radiator, but I was watching him in my peripheral vision. He was looking at the magazine with something like hunger. Not a dirty magazine. It looked like a business publication. After a few minutes, he noticed me watching. "What are you looking at, old man?" he snapped. I shook my head and went back to my work, but I'd seen something in his eyes that troubled me. Not just anger, but pain. Deep, festering pain. You know what this place is? The boy said suddenly. It's a warehouse. They warehouse us until we're 18, and then they throw us out like garbage. All those rich people who donate money, they don't care about us. We're just tax write-offs. I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that people did care, that I cared. But how could I, when everything I was seeing proved him right? That evening, I witnessed the dinner service. The children filed into the dining hall in silence, taking their seats at long wooden tables scarred with decades of graffiti. There were about 40 boys, ranging in age from 6 to 17. They all had the same look, guarded, suspicious, expecting nothing good. Sister Clara and 2 other staff members served the meal. I hung back in the shadows, but I could see everything clearly. The food was a watery soup with a few pieces of mystery meat floating in it, and a single slice of white bread per child. That was it. That was dinner. I thought about the menu I'd approved in the budget. Fresh vegetables, lean proteins, whole grains, fruit for dessert. The food budget was generous, $30 per child per day for nutritious, balanced meals. This meal probably cost $3. If that. Where was the rest of the money going? I pulled out my camera and recorded everything. The thin soup, the hungry eyes of the children, the way they scraped their bowls clean and looked longingly at the empty serving pot. Then I saw her, Ms. Crypt, emerging from what must have been her private office. She was carrying a to-go box from what looked like an expensive restaurant. The smell of real food, garlic, herbs, quality ingredients, wafted across the dining hall. The children watched her pass with dead eyes. They were used to this disparity. It was just another day in their lives. Miss Crypt paused by my position near the door. Ben, when you're done lurking, there's a clogged toilet on the second floor. Get to it. She walked past me without a second glance, heading upstairs to her private quarters to eat her gourmet meal while the children she was supposed to care for went to bed hungry. I stood there in the shadows, my hands clenched so tight around my toolbox that my knuckles were white. This was my orphanage, my money, my responsibility, and I had let this happen. I spent my first 3 days at Thornhaven in a state of barely controlled rage. Every repair I made revealed another layer of corruption. The new gymnasium I'd funded turned out to be Ms. Crypt's private garage, where a brand-new Mercedes sat gleaming. The educational programs were non-existent. The children spent most of their days doing manual labor, scrubbing floors, and doing laundry. The new library was a locked room filled with boxes of donated books that had never been unpacked. I documented everything. The camera hidden in my button captured hundreds of hours of footage. The broken promises, the stolen resources, the casual cruelty. But it was the children themselves who broke my heart. They were so quiet, so defeated. They moved through the building like ghosts, trying to be invisible, trying not to draw attention. Because attention meant punishment. I saw a 6-year-old get slapped by one of the staff for crying. I saw a teenager get his dinner taken away because he'd forgotten to say thank you, ma'am, to Ms. Crypt. I saw children working in the freezing cold, washing windows with bare hands turned blue from the temperature. And through it all, I had to stay silent. Stay in character. Document everything, but change nothing. It was killing me. On the 4th day, I took my lunch break in the small garden behind the building. It was November, and the garden was mostly dead, but there was a bench that got a little winter sun. I sat down with the sandwich I'd brought from outside. I refused to eat the slop they served here, and closed my eyes, trying to collect myself. Mister. I opened my eyes to find a small boy standing a few feet away, watching me with cautious curiosity. He was maybe 10 years old, painfully thin, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that were too old for his face. I recognized him from the dormitory. He had the bed in the far corner, as far from everyone else as possible. I'd noticed him because he was always alone. While the other children formed loose alliances and groups, this boy was solitary. He was staring at my sandwich. I looked down at it, then back at him. He flushed and started to turn away. I held out half the sandwich to him. He froze, looking at me with suspicion and something else, desperate hope. I nodded encouragingly and gestured for him to take it. He approached slowly, like a wild animal approaching a trap, ready to bolt at any sudden movement. When he was close enough, he snatched the sandwich from my hand and stepped back quickly. Then he just stood there, holding it, as if he didn't quite believe it was real. You can eat it, I wanted to say, but I maintained my cover, just gesturing from the sandwich to his mouth. He took a small bite, then a bigger one, then devoured the whole thing in about 30 seconds. When he was done, he looked at me with wonder. "Thank you," he whispered. I smiled and patted the bench next to me, inviting him to sit. He hesitated, then carefully sat down, maintaining a careful distance. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I could feel him working up to something, stealing glances at me, trying to decide if I was safe. Finally, he spoke. "Are you really mute? Or are you just pretending?" I froze. Then I pulled out a small notebook I'd been carrying and wrote. "Hard to talk. Easier not to." He read it and nodded solemnly. "I understand. Sometimes I pretend I can't hear things. It's easier." My heart clenched. How much had this child had to endure to develop that survival strategy? "What's your name?" I wrote. "Leo," he said. Then, after a pause, "What's yours?" "Ben." "That's a good name," Leo said. "It's solid. Dependable." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Leo said, "You're different from the other adults here." I raised my eyebrows questioningly. "You're kind," he explained simply. "You gave me food. You didn't have to do that." I wrote, "Everyone deserves kindness." Leo laughed, but it was a bitter sound, too harsh for a 10-year-old. "That's not how it works here. Miss Crypt says we have to earn kindness. We have to be good, and we're never good enough." Before I could respond, he pulled something from his pocket. It was a piece of paper, carefully folded and refolded so many times it was falling apart. He unfolded it with reverent care. It was a page torn from a business magazine. And there, in the center, was a photograph of me, Julian Thorne, at some charity gala, wearing a tuxedo and smiling for the cameras. "This is Julian Thorne," Leo said, his voice full of awe. "He built this place. He takes care of all of us. He's the richest, most powerful man in the world." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "The other kids say he doesn't care about us," Leo continued. "They say he just built this place for tax reasons, and he's probably never even been here. But I know that's not true. I know he cares." "How do you know?" I wrote, my hand shaking. Leo looked at me with absolute certainty. "Because I know what it's like to be alone. And someone who'd been alone wouldn't build a place for other kids unless he really cared. He understands us. He's watching over us, even if we can't see him." He carefully folded the picture back up and put it in his pocket. "Someday, I'm going to meet him. I'm going to thank him for giving me a home. Even if it's not perfect, it's better than being on the street." Right. I couldn't write anything. I couldn't trust myself to respond. This child had created an entire mythology around me. He'd turned me into some kind of guardian angel, watching over him from afar. And the reality was, I hadn't even known he existed until 4 days ago. "I should go," Leo said, standing up. "Miss Crypt doesn't like us talking to the staff. Says we'll get uppity." He smiled at me. "Thanks for the sandwich, Ben. You're a good person." He walked away, leaving me sitting on the bench, staring at nothing. The great Julian Thorne. The billionaire philanthropist. The champion of children. I was a fraud. The inspection was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I found out about it when Ms. Crypt called an emergency staff meeting on Saturday morning. I lurked in the back of her office, ostensibly fixing a loose shelf, while she addressed her small team. "The state inspector will be here on Tuesday at 10 a.m., she announced. "This is a routine visit, but we need to put on a good show. Sister Clara, I need the children in their uniforms." Sister Clara frowned. "We don't have uniforms, Miss Crypt. You said we couldn't afford." "I'm aware of what I said," Miss Crypt snapped. "I've ordered uniforms for the inspection. They'll arrive Monday. The children will wear them for exactly 3 hours during the inspection, and then we'll return them to the supplier for a full refund." I nearly dropped the screwdriver I was holding. Even for her, this was breathtaking. "We're returning the clothes?" Sister Clara asked, her voice small. "Obviously. Do you think we can afford to waste money on uniforms the children will just destroy? They'll wear them for the photos, smile for the inspector, and then we'll pack them back up." Miss Crypt examined her manicured nails. "I've also arranged for a catering company to deliver lunch during the inspection. The inspector will see the children eating a healthy, balanced meal." "And after the inspection?" one of the other staff members asked. "Back to regular meals, obviously. We have a budget to maintain." Sister Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but Ms. Crypt's expression made it clear the discussion was over. "I also need everyone to clean this place top to bottom, Ms. Crypt continued. "I want it spotless. Ben, you'll focus on the visible areas, the entrance hall, the stairs, the dining room. Make it look like we actually maintain this building. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral while my insides roiled with fury. One more thing, Ms. Crypt said, her voice dropping to a dangerous level. If any of you say anything to the inspector about the real conditions here, you'll be terminated immediately. No references. No severance. Nothing. Are we clear? Everyone nodded. Excellent. Now get to work. Over the next 2 days, I watched the orphanage transform into a theater production. The children were drilled on what to say to the inspector. Yes, we're very happy here. The food is delicious. Miss Crypt takes very good care of us. They practice their lines like actors, their voices flat and emotionless. Any child who couldn't convincingly lie was threatened with punishment. I watched a 7-year-old get locked in a closet for 2 hours because he kept stuttering over his lines. The building itself received a cosmetic makeover. We scrubbed and painted and patched. The entrance hall gleamed. The dining room sparkled. The dormitories were cleaned until they looked almost habitable. But it was all surface, all show. Underneath, everything was still broken. Monday evening, the uniforms arrived. They were beautiful, crisp white shirts, navy blazers, gray slacks. The children looked like they attended a prep school instead of a warehouse for the unwanted. Miss Crypt inspected them with a critical eye, adjusting collars and straightening ties. For a moment, she almost looked like she cared. Then she said, "Remember, these clothes are borrowed. Don't get them dirty. Don't sit down if you can help it." And smile. The photographer will be here at 10:30. Leo stood in his uniform, looking down at himself with wonder. He touched the fabric of the blazer like it was made of gold. "I look fancy," he whispered to the boy next to him. "Don't get used to it," the older boy muttered back. "It's all fake. Everything here is fake." But Leo was smiling anyway, lost in the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, this was real. That maybe Mr. Thorne had arranged for them to have nice clothes. That maybe someone cared. I had to leave the room before I did something that would blow my cover. Tuesday morning arrived. The inspector was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who'd probably seen too many orphanages and not enough justice. But she was thorough, I'd give her that. Miss Crypt was the perfect hostess. Charming, warm, attentive. She showed the inspector the gleaming facilities, the new heating system, which was actually just the old system that I'd gotten running temporarily, the well-stocked pantry, which had been filled the night before and would be emptied immediately after the inspection. The children performed their roles perfectly. Yes, they were happy. Yes, the food was good. Yes, Miss Crypt was wonderful. The inspector made notes and asked questions. At one point, she tried to speak to a child alone, but Ms. Crypt smoothly intervened. "Of course, but I hope you don't mind if I observe. For the child's comfort, you understand. Some of our boys have experienced trauma and get nervous around strangers." It was a masterful manipulation. The inspector couldn't refuse without looking heartless. I watched from the shadows as I mopped the entrance hall, invisible in my janitor's costume. The inspector never even glanced at me. I was just part of the furniture. The catered lunch arrived at noon. I watched the children's faces as they saw real food, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, fresh fruit. Some of the younger ones started crying. Tears of joy. Miss Crypt explained to the inspector smoothly. "They're so grateful for your advocacy. Thanks to people like you, they have a wonderful home." The inspector smiled, pleased. After lunch, there was a photo session. The children in their borrowed uniforms, smiling their practice smiles, looking like a recruitment poster for orphanage success stories. Leo stood in the front row, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he looked genuinely happy. He believed the fantasy. He thought this was real. My heart broke all over again. By 3 p.m., the inspector was gone, satisfied that Thornhaven was a well-run institution worthy of continued funding. Within 15 minutes, Miss Crypt had the children back in their threadbare clothes. The uniforms were carefully packed back in their boxes, ready to be returned. The leftover catered food was loaded into Miss Crypt's personal car. "No sense letting it go to waste," she said cheerfully. Dinner that night was the usual watery soup. And life at Thornhaven returned to normal. I found the garbage bag in the basement on a Friday night. I'd been sent down to fix a leaking pipe. A real leak this time, not just cosmetic. The basement was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and locked rooms, most of which seemed to be storage for things that should have been thrown away decades ago. I was making my way through one of these corridors when I noticed a black garbage bag that had split open, spilling its contents across the floor. I started to step over it, then stopped. Letters. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. I knelt down and picked one up. The envelope was decorated with a child's drawing. A stick figure house with a smiling sun. The address read, Mr. Julian Thorne, Thorne Foundations. My hands started shaking. I opened the letter. The handwriting was shaky, clearly from a young child. Dear Mr. Thorne, thank you for the food. The teacher said you send money so we can eat good. I like pizza best. Do you like pizza too? Your friend, Danny, age 7. I grabbed another letter. And another. And another. They were all addressed to me. All from the children. All expressing gratitude, asking questions, sharing their small triumphs and hopes. Dear Mr. Thorne, I got an A on my spelling test. Dear Mr. Thorne, I want to be a doctor when I grow up. Dear Mr. Thorne, thank you for my home. None of them had been mailed. All of them had been thrown away like trash. I sat there on the cold basement floor, surrounded by the voices of children I'd never heard, and I felt something inside me break open. They'd written to me. They'd trusted me. They'd believed in me, and I'd never even known they existed. I started sorting through the letters, looking for, I don't know what. Proof of something. Evidence of something. A reason to justify my rage. Then I found it. A letter in an envelope decorated with careful drawings of stars. The return address said, Leo Warren, age 10, Thornhaven for boys. I opened it with trembling hands. Dear Dad, Mr. Thorne, Sister Clara says I shouldn't call you Dad because you're not really my dad, but sometimes I pretend you are. Is that okay? I hope that's okay. I got an A in math this week. The teacher said I'm really good with numbers. Maybe I could work for you someday. I could help with your business and make you proud. The other kids say you'll never come here, but I know they're wrong. I know you're busy saving the whole world, but maybe when you have time, you could visit? I'd like to meet you. I'd like to say thank you for giving me a home. I know I'm not special or important, but I want you to know that I think about you every day. When things are hard, I think about you, and it makes me feel better. I pretend you're watching over me like a guardian angel. Is that silly? Sister Clara says God watches over us, but I like thinking you're watching over me too. Thank you for everything, Mr. Thorne. You're the best dad. The best person in the whole world. Love. Leo. P.S. Can you come visit for Christmas? I know you're busy, but it would be the best present ever. The letter was dated 18 months ago. I sat there in the basement, surrounded by hundreds of discarded letters from children who thought I cared about them, holding a letter from a boy who'd created an entire father figure out of his desperation for someone to love him. And I wept. I wept for the children I'd failed. I wept for the boy who called me dad without ever having met me. I wept for the 17 foster homes I'd survived and the promise I'd made to myself to do better, to be better. I wept because I was 50 years old, worth billions of dollars, and I'd become exactly the kind of absent adult I'd sworn I'd never be. When I finally pulled myself together, I carefully collected all the letters and hid them in my locker in the staff room. Evidence. Testimony. Proof of Ms. Crypt's cruelty. But more than that, a promise to myself. These children had reached out to me, and I'd been too disconnected to even know. That ended now. It happened on a Sunday night. Sundays were the worst days at Thornhaven. No inspections. No visitors. No need to pretend. Just the grinding reality of institutional neglect, stretching out interminably. I'd been fixing a broken window in the hallway near the boys' dormitory when the evening bell rang, signaling the children to prepare for bed. I heard them filing past, their footsteps echoing in the corridor. Then I heard voices. Angry voices. I put down my tools and moved quietly toward the sound. The hallway was dimly lit, shadows stretching long and distorted against the peeling wallpaper. I pressed myself against the wall and peered around the corner. Rolex, the 14-year-old I'd seen on my first day, had Leo backed against the wall. 2 other boys flanked him, blocking any escape. Leo was clutching something to his chest, his face set in stubborn defiance despite his obvious fear. Give it back. Leo's voice cracked. Give what back? Rolex sneered, holding a familiar piece of paper high above his head. The magazine clipping. My photograph. That's mine. Leo jumped for it, but Rolex was taller, easily keeping it out of reach. Why do you keep this trash? Rolex demanded, examining the picture with exaggerated curiosity. It's just some rich guy from a magazine. Stupid. He doesn't know you. He's a billionaire. You're a rat. He's not just some rich guy, Leo shouted, his face flushing red. He's Julian Thorne. He built this place. He takes care of us. The other boys laughed. The sound echoed cruelly in the narrow hallway. Takes care of us, one of them mocked. Are you blind? Look around, Leo. The heat doesn't work. The food is garbage. We wear rags. If Julian Thorne takes care of us, we're screwed. You don't understand, Leo said desperately. He's busy. He's important. He has to save the whole world. But he still watches over us. He still cares. He doesn't care about us, Rolex said, his voice turning hard. We're nothing to him. Just tax write-offs. Numbers on a paper. My social worker told me. Rich people donate to places like this so they can feel good about themselves and pay less taxes. It's all a scam. That's not true. Leo's voice rose higher, becoming shrill with desperation. Then where is he? Rolex challenged. If he cares so much, why hasn't he ever visited? Why hasn't he ever met you? Face it, Leo, you're living in a fantasy. I'm not. Leo was crying now, tears streaming down his face. He's real. He cares. He's mine. He stopped abruptly, but Rolex pounced on the hesitation. You're what? He demanded. Say it. What is he to you, Leo? Leo's face crumpled. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. He's my dad. The hallway went silent. Even the bullies seemed shocked. What? Rolex said slowly. Leo straightened up, wiping his tears away with the back of his hand. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, as if saying it out loud had made it more real. Julian Thorne is my dad, he said clearly. That's why he built this place. He was looking for me. My mom left me at the fire station when I was a baby, but she must have told him where I was. He built this orphanage so I'd have a safe place to wait for him. He's coming back for me. I know he is. I felt the blood drain from my face. The hallway seemed to tilt. You're crazy, Rolex said, but he sounded uncertain now. No, I'm not. Leo was gathering steam, his fantasy growing more elaborate, more necessary, as he spoke. He visits me in my dreams. He tells me to be strong. He says, hang on, Leo. I'm coming. Just hold on a little longer. He's busy building us a house. A big house with a swimming pool and a library and everything. And when it's ready, he's going to come get me in a limousine and take me away from here. Away from all of you. His voice had risen to a shout. The other boys were staring at him with a mixture of pity and scorn. He doesn't even know you exist, Rolex said quietly, and somehow the quiet was more cruel than the shouting had been. Your dad is some drunk who knocked up your mom and disappeared. Julian Thorne is just a guy on TV. You're nobody to him. You're nobody to anyone. He shoved Leo hard against the wall. Leo's head cracked against the plaster with a sickening thud. He slid down the wall, still clutching his magazine clipping, tears streaming down his face. You're trash, Leo, Rolex said. We're all trash. The sooner you accept that, the better. The boys walked away, leaving Leo crumpled on the floor. I stood frozen in the shadows, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from crying out. The wrench in my other hand clattered to the floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet hallway. Leo's head snapped up. He saw me standing there, and for a moment our eyes met. His face was wet with tears, his expression a mixture of shame and defiance. I wanted to go to him. I wanted to tell him who I was. I wanted to pick him up and carry him out of this nightmare and never let anyone hurt him again. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I broke my cover now, MS. Crypt would destroy all the evidence, scatter the staff, and I'd never be able to prove what was happening here. So instead, I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I picked up my wrench, gave Leo a small nod, an acknowledgement that I'd seen him, that I saw his pain, and walked away. Behind me, I heard a small, broken sound. Leo, crying alone in the hallway. I made it 3 steps before I had to stop and lean against the wall, my whole body shaking. A boy, a child, had created an entire mythology around me, had turned me into his father, his savior, his only source of hope in a world that had given him nothing but cruelty. And I hadn't even known he existed. The great Julian Thorne, the philanthropist, the champion of children. I was a monster, but not for much longer. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Marcus. Move up the timeline. I'm ending this now. The next 3 days were a blur of barely contained rage. I continued my work, maintaining my cover as the quiet janitor, but every moment was agony. I watched Leo move through the orphanage like a ghost, avoiding the other boys, clutching his tattered magazine, clipping like a talisman. He'd stopped eating. Sister Clara tried to coax him to take some soup, but he just shook his head and walked away. I'm worried about that one, Sister Clara confided to me one afternoon, watching Leo's thin form disappear into the dormitory. He's always been in his own world, but lately, it's like he's given up. I wanted to tell her that I'd fix it, that I'd save him, that help was coming. Instead, I just nodded and went back to mopping the floor. Marcus was working around the clock, pulling together the evidence I'd gathered. The videos, the financial records, the testimonies I'd carefully recorded from Sister Clara and the other staff members who were willing to speak out. We were building an airtight case. But it took time. Time that Leo didn't have. It happened on Wednesday afternoon. I was in the basement, fixing a burst pipe, when I heard shouting from upstairs. I grabbed my toolbox and headed up, following the sound. It was coming from the main office, Miss Crypt's domain. I arrived to find Miss Crypt standing over Leo, her face purple with rage. Leo was backed into a corner, trembling but defiant. In Miss Crypt's hand was the magazine clipping, torn into pieces. "This is what happens to liars," she screamed, throwing the pieces at Leo. "You told the other boys that Julian Thorne is your father? Are you insane? Are you trying to make this orphanage look like a circus?" "He is my father," Leo shouted back, his voice breaking. "He is. He's coming for me. He doesn't know you exist, you delusional little." Miss Crypt's hand shot out and grabbed Leo's arm, her manicured nails digging into his flesh. "You're nothing. You're nobody. Your mother threw you away like garbage, and that's exactly what you are. Garbage. Let go of me." Leo tried to pull away, but she was stronger. "You want to live in fantasy land? Fine. You can spend some time in the box. Maybe that will teach you the difference between fantasy and reality." The box. I'd heard the other children whisper about it with dread. A dark storage closet on the third floor where children were locked as punishment. Some kids had spent days in there. "No." Leo's voice rose to a scream. "Please. I'm sorry. I won't say it again." Too late. Miss Crypt started dragging him toward the door. That's when I moved. I stepped out of the shadows and put myself between Miss Crypt and the door. My hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, the one holding Leo's arm. "Let him go," I said. My first word since arriving at Thornhaven. My real voice. Not the raspy whisper of Ben the janitor, but the voice of Julian Thorne. Miss Crypt's eyes widened in shock. She tried to pull her arm away, but I held firm. "Get your filthy hands off me," she shrieked. "You're fired. Security. Security." But there was no security. There never had been. It was just another lie. I said let him go. I repeated, my voice deadly calm. Something in my tone made her release Leo. He stumbled backward, staring at me with wide, confused eyes. Ms. Crypt recovered quickly, her shock turning to fury. "How dare you? You assault me in my own office. I'll have you arrested." You'll do nothing," I said quietly. I pulled off my beanie, revealing my face fully for the first time. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She'd seen me before, of course, at galas, in photos, on the news. But her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. Julian Thorne, billionaire CEO, dressed as a janitor in her orphanage. "You?" she whispered. "Me," I confirmed. I turned to Leo, who was still pressed against the wall, his eyes huge in his pale face. "Leo, go find Sister Clara. Stay with her. Don't come back here." But Leo's voice was tiny. "Go. Now." He ran. I turned back to Miss Crypt, who had regained some of her composure. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice switching to the syrupy sweet tone she used with donors. "What a surprise. If you'd told me you were visiting, I would have prepared a proper welcome. This is all just a misunderstanding. That boy, he has behavioral issues, and—" "Stop talking," I said. She stopped. "The board of directors will be here in 1 hour," I continued. "I suggest you use that time to pack your personal belongings. Because you're done." Her face went white. "You can't." "I can. I will. And I have enough evidence to see you in prison for the rest of your life." "Evidence?" She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Evidence of what?" "This orphanage is run according to all regulations. Every penny is accounted for. In your personal bank account, yes. The gymnasium, that's actually your private garage. The catering company that's owned by your sister. The heating system that was never installed. The food budget that you've been pocketing while feeding the children slop. The letters you threw away. The children you've abused. All documented. All recorded. All ready to present to the board, the police, and the media. The color drained from her face completely. You've been undercover, she whispered. This whole time. This whole time, I confirmed. And I've seen everything. She collapsed into her chair, all pretense of control gone. It was supposed to be just a little extra, she said, her voice hollow. Just enough to make life comfortable. Nobody was supposed to notice. The children were fine. They had food, shelter. They were cold, I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. They were hungry. They were broken. And you didn't care because to you, they were just a resource to be exploited. I gave them a home, she protested. You gave them a prison. I pulled out my phone. The board will be here in 57 minutes. I suggest you use that time wisely. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Ms. Crypt? That boy you just assaulted? The one you told was garbage? His name is Leo Warren. And from this moment on, he's my son. If you ever, and I mean ever, go near him again, I will destroy you in ways that will make prison look like a vacation. Are we clear? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I walked out and closed the door behind me. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. I'd blown my cover, potentially compromised the investigation, and made a promise I had no idea how to keep. But I didn't care. Some things were more important than strategy. The board arrived at exactly 4 p.m. I'd cleaned up as best I could, changed out of the janitor's overalls into a suit I'd had Marcus bring, but I hadn't shaved or done anything about my hair. I wanted them to see what I'd become in their absence. There were 7 board members, all respected pillars of the community. All people who'd trusted me to run the foundation responsibly. All people who were about to discover they'd failed in their oversight. They filed into the conference room, looking confused and concerned. Ms. Crypt was already there, sitting at the far end of the table, her mascara smudged from crying. Julian, said Margaret Harrison, the board chair. What's going on? Your assistant said there was an emergency. Sit down, I said. All of you. They sat. I stood at the head of the table and pulled up the first video on the conference room screen. It showed the boys' dormitory, the broken radiator, the thin blankets, the frost on the windows. This is Thornhaven, I said quietly. The flagship orphanage of our foundation. The institution I personally funded with $5 million last year. I clicked to the next image. Ms. Crypt's private garage, with the Mercedes gleaming under expensive lights. This is the new gymnasium we paid for. Another click. The children eating their watery soup while catered food was carried past them to Ms. Crypt's office. This is the nutritious meal program we funded. Another click. The bag of discarded letters. These are the letters from the children that were never mailed. Letters thanking us for our care. Letters asking for help. Letters that Ms. Crypt threw in the trash. I went through image after image, video after video. The board members' faces grew progressively more horrified. When I was done, I pulled out the financial analysis Marcus had prepared. Over the past 5 years, approximately $12 million that was designated for the care of these children has been diverted to personal use. Ms. Crypt's bank accounts, her property purchases, her luxury car, her designer wardrobe. I looked directly at Ms. Crypt, who had her face in her hands. She turned our foundation into her personal piggy bank. And we never noticed because we never looked. We trusted the reports. We believed the photos. We never bothered to actually visit and see what was happening to the children we swore to protect. How did you discover this? Margaret asked, her voice shaking. I went undercover, I said simply. For the past 2 weeks, I've been working here as a janitor. I saw everything firsthand. One of the other board members, David Chun, spoke up. Julian, the legal exposure alone. I don't care about legal exposure. I cut him off. I care about 43 children who've been neglected and abused on our watch. I care about a system so broken that a woman like Ms. Crypt could steal millions while children went hungry, and nobody noticed. What do you want us to do? Margaret asked. First, Ms. Crypt is terminated immediately. Criminal charges will be filed. I've already been in contact with the district attorney. Second, we're shutting down this facility for complete renovation. The children will be temporarily relocated to safe, properly run facilities. Third, we're implementing new oversight protocols for all our institutions. Surprise inspections, direct interviews with staff and children, financial audits conducted by independent firms. I paused, looking at each board member in turn. And fourth, we're all taking a hard look at ourselves and asking why we let this happen. Because this isn't just Ms. Crypt's failure. It's ours. We let paperwork substitute for presence. We let good intentions substitute for good oversight. We failed these children. The room was silent. Finally, Margaret spoke. I move that we accept all of Julian's recommendations and grant him full authority to implement whatever changes he deems necessary. Seconded, David said quietly. All in favor. Every hand went up. Miss Crypt looked up from her hands. You're all hypocrites, she said, her voice bitter. You want to blame me? Fine. But you're the ones who never visited, never asked questions, never cared enough to see what was really happening. I'm guilty, but so are you. She wasn't wrong. The difference, I said quietly, is that we're going to fix it. You're just going to prison. At that moment, the door opened and 2 police officers entered. Beatrice Crypt, one of them said. She stood, trying to maintain some dignity as they read her rights and cuffed her hands behind her back. As they led her past me, she paused. That boy, she said. Leo, he really thinks you're his father. I know. What are you going to do when you break his heart? When you send him to another foster home and disappear back into your ivory tower? I looked her in the eye. I'm not going to break his heart. I'm going to be his father. She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You can't just adopt him because you feel guilty. Watch me. They led her away. After the board meeting, after Miss Crypt had been taken away, after the initial chaos had settled, I found Sister Clara in the chapel. She was praying, her weathered hands clasped together, her face peaceful despite everything happening around her. She looked up when I entered, and her eyes widened. Mr. Thorne, she said, standing. I thought. They said you were the janitor? I was, I said, sitting in the pew beside her. I am. I'm a lot of things, Sister Clara. But mostly, I'm someone who's been absent when I should have been present. You came, she said simply. That's what matters. I got your letter. The one you sent to my apartment. It was the only reason I came. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't know if it would reach you. I didn't know if you'd care. I cared. I just didn't know how bad things were. I paused. Why did you stay? You could have quit, found work somewhere else. And leave the children? She looked shocked at the suggestion. No, Mr. Thorne. These children have been abandoned by everyone else in their lives. I wasn't going to be one more person who walked away. Shame washed over me. This elderly nun, working for barely minimum wage, had shown more integrity and dedication than I had with all my billions. I want you to be the new director, I said. She shook her head. I'm too old, and I don't have the education. You have something more important. You have love for these children. You stayed when everyone else would have left. That's the kind of person who should be in charge. What about Leo? She asked quietly. The other children are saying you're going to adopt him. Is that true? If he'll have me, I said. I know it's sudden. I know it's not conventional. But that boy needs a father, and I need to be the person I promised myself I'd be. Sister Clara smiled. He's in the box. Miss Crypt locked him there before everything happened. No one's let him out yet. My blood ran cold. How long has he been in there? For hours. I ran. The box was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a narrow hallway that looked like something out of a Victorian nightmare. It was a storage closet, barely 4 feet by 4 feet, with no windows and a heavy lock on the outside. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock. When I finally got it open, the door swung outward, and I saw Leo. He was curled in the corner, his arms wrapped around his knees, his face buried. He didn't move when the door opened. Didn't look up at the sudden light. Leo, I said softly. No response. I knelt in the doorway. Leo, it's okay. You can come out now. Finally, slowly, he lifted his head. His face was streaked with tears and dirt. His eyes were hollow. Are you real? He whispered. Or are you another dream? My heart shattered. I'm real, Leo. I'm here. The janitor who talks, he said, his voice distant. You're not Ben. No, I'm not Ben. I took a deep breath. My name is Julian Thorne. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then his face crumpled. Don't, he said, his voice breaking. Don't do that. Don't pretend. The other boys already laugh at me enough. I'm not pretending. I pulled out my wallet and showed him my driver's license. My credit cards. All with my real name. I'm really Julian Thorne. I've been working here undercover for the past 2 weeks because I needed to see what was really happening. He looked at the ID, then at me, then back at the ID. His hands started to shake. You're really him? I'm really him. But why? Why were you pretending to be a janitor? Because I needed to see the truth. And the truth was that I'd been sending money to this place, but I'd never bothered to visit. I'd never bothered to make sure the money was actually helping. I'd never bothered to meet the children I was supposed to be helping. Tears welled up in Leo's eyes again. So you're not my dad. The question, the hope and fear wrapped up in those 5 words, broke something fundamental inside me. I could have told him the truth. Could have explained that I wasn't his biological father, that his fantasy was just that, a fantasy born of desperation. Instead, I held out my hand. No, I said gently. I'm not your biological father. Your birth father is someone I've never met. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be your father anyway. Not because we share DNA, but because I want to be. Because you need a father, and I need to be the kind of person who shows up. Leo stared at my outstretched hand like it might disappear if he touched it. You want to be my dad? He whispered. For real. For real. If you'll have me. He launched himself at me, wrapping his thin arms around my neck and sobbing into my shoulder. I held him, this child who'd created a mythology around me because he'd needed someone to believe in, and I made a silent promise. I would be the father he'd imagined. I would be the hero he'd needed. I would show up every day for the rest of my life. We sat in the hallway outside the box for a long time, Leo curled against my side while I explained everything. How I'd grown up in foster care too. How I'd built my fortune but lost my connection to the mission along the way. How his letter, the one that had been thrown away, had been found and had broken my heart. I wrote you lots of letters, Leo said quietly. Did you get any of them? No, I admitted. Miss Crypt threw them all away. But I found them, Leo. I read every single one. Even the one where I called you Dad. Especially that one. He was quiet for a moment. Then, was it stupid? Pretending you were my dad? No, I said firmly. It was survival. You created a story that gave you hope, that gave you a reason to keep going. That's not stupid. That's brave. The other boys say I'm crazy. The other boys are wrong. He looked up at me, his eyes searching my face. Why do you want to adopt me? Is it because you feel bad? I thought about how to answer. I could give him platitudes, tell him what he wanted to hear. But he deserved the truth. At first, I said slowly, I think it was guilt. I heard you defending me to those bullies, heard you call me your father, and I realized I'd failed you. Failed all of you. And yes, I felt terrible about that. His face started to fall, but I continued. But then I got to know you. I watched you share your only piece of bread with a younger kid. I saw you stand up to bullies even though you knew you'd lose. I saw you protect your hope like it was the most precious thing in the world, even when everyone told you to give it up. And I realized something. What? That you're exactly the kind of person I want in my life. Not because I owe you something, but because you're brave and kind and resilient. Because you make me want to be better. Because when I think about the future, I want you in it. Leo was crying again, but this time with a smile on his face. So you really want to be my dad? Not because you have to, but because you want to. I really want to be your dad. He hugged me again, tighter this time. Can I call you Dad? He asked, his voice muffled against my shoulder. My throat was too tight to speak, so I just nodded. Dad? He whispered, testing out the word. Dad. Dad. And just like that, I became a father. The legal process took 3 months. 3 months of home studies and background checks and interviews and paperwork. 3 months of Leo living in a temporary foster placement while I converted one of the rooms in my penthouse into his bedroom. 3 months of supervised visits where we got to know each other as real people instead of fantasies. It was hard. Leo had trauma, years of neglect and abandonment that didn't magically disappear because someone finally wanted him. He had nightmares. He had trust issues. He tested me constantly, pushing boundaries to see if I'd leave like everyone else had. I didn't leave. We went to therapy together, both individual sessions and family counseling. We learned how to communicate, how to trust, how to build something real from the fragments of our broken pasts. And slowly, day by day, we became a family. Thornhaven was shut down for 6 months for complete renovation. The children were relocated to properly run facilities, places I personally visited and vetted. Sister Clara supervised the renovation, working with architects and contractors to create a place that actually felt like a home. When it reopened, it was transformed. Heated floors, nutritious food prepared by actual chefs, private rooms instead of dormitories, A real gymnasium. A library filled with books. Art studios. Music rooms. Everything I'd promised, but never delivered. And Sister Clara was the director, with a staff of people who actually cared about the children they served. We renamed it. Not Thornhaven anymore. The name had too many bad associations. The children voted, and they chose Leo's home. Leo was embarrassed, but pleased. The adoption was finalized on a cold day in February, exactly 3 months and 12 days after I'd opened that door to the box and found my son. The courtroom was small, just the judge, the social worker, Marcus, who'd become like an uncle to Leo, Sister Clara, and a handful of the other children from the orphanage who'd become Leo's friends. The judge smiled at us. "Mr. Thorne, do you understand that adoption is a permanent commitment? That Leo will be your legal son in every way, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." "I understand, Your Honor." "And Leo, do you want Julian Thorne to be your father?" Leo looked up at me, and I saw in his eyes everything we'd been through together. The fear, the hope, the slow building of trust, the love that had grown between us. "Yes," he said clearly. "He's already my dad. This just makes it official." The judge's smile widened. "Then by the power vested in me by the state, I declare this adoption finalized. Congratulations, Mr. Thorne. Congratulations, Leo. You're officially a family." Leo threw his arms around me, and I held him close. This child who'd called me father before we'd ever met, who'd believed in me when I didn't deserve it, who'd taught me what it really meant to show up. "I love you, Dad," he whispered. "I love you too, son," I whispered back. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. Leo is 15 now, tall and confident in a way that seems miraculous given where he started. He still has the magazine clipping, the 1ms. Crip tore up and he carefully taped back together. But now it's framed and hanging in his room, not as a fantasy, but as a reminder of the journey we've taken together. He wants to be a social worker. Says he wants to help other kids like him. Kids stuck in the system. Kids who need someone to believe in them. I couldn't be prouder. Thornhaven, Leo's home, is thriving. Sister Clara is in her 70s now, talking about retirement, but she can't quite bring herself to leave. She says the children keep her young. We've replicated the model at all 7 of our facilities. Surprise inspections, independent audits, and most importantly, I visit every facility every month. I meet with the children, hear their stories, make sure they know they're not just numbers on a spreadsheet. I've adopted 2 more children, siblings from one of our other facilities who needed a home. Leo was excited to become a big brother. The foundation is bigger than ever, but it's different now. It's not about my ego or my legacy or tax benefits. It's about the kids. Always the kids. I still attend galas and charity events, but now when people call me a philanthropist, I don't feel like a fraud. Because I'm not writing checks from an ivory tower anymore. I'm showing up. I'm present. I'm doing the work. Last week, Leo came home from school excited about a project. They're studying influential figures in history, and he chose to write about me. Not the billionaire stuff, he clarified. The important stuff. How you went undercover to save kids. How you adopted me even though you didn't have to. How you changed the whole system. I was embarrassed, but he was insistent. "You're my hero, Dad," he said simply. "Not because you're rich or famous. Because you showed up when nobody else would." Later that night, I pulled out my old photograph, me at 10 years old, standing in front of my 4th foster home, suspicious and scared. I looked at that boy, at the pain and hope in his eyes, and I thought about all the foster homes and all the years of feeling unwanted. And then I looked at the family photos on my desk. Me and Leo at his 8th grade graduation. Me and all 3 kids at Disneyland. Me and Sister Clara at the reopening of Leo's home. I'd made a promise to that scared 10-year-old boy. I'd be different. I'd be the adult who showed up, who cared, who saved the kids who needed saving. It had taken me 40 years and an undercover investigation to finally keep that promise. But I kept it. And every day, when Leo calls me Dad, I'm reminded that some promises are worth the wait.